moments later, I just felt my brain, literally snap in half due to the deprivation of oxygen. And once my brain cracked open, that's when the spirit realm, and as the saying goes, God came in, and I just left my body. I ascended, very quickly, onto the higher realms. And it was a beautiful moment, certainly in time, that unfolded and unpacked a lot of things that have always been inside of each person that we forget. I mean, such things that I saw were
Today, I'd like to welcome Jacob Cooper to the show. Jacob, welcome. It's such an honor and pleasure to finally have you on my show. How is today treating you?
well, thank you for all, and first and foremost, the great work that you do and your podcast and your channel, and having me on. Today is a beautiful moment in time to just be talking and connecting with you. And it's a small world from, East Coast to West Coast. We're able to have this conversation, feeling like we're connected to each other. And hopefully, and I know so many others will ride that connection in this wave of connectivity with us together too, and just take a beautiful ride to elevation and ascension together.
Yes, I love how you said that. There's times where I can get so frustrated with technology, but in times like this, I'm so grateful for it because it does bring people together and we can share a lot of information to a lot of people this way. And I have heard you speak on podcasts before, and I know you're an author of several books. And so I'm really excited that we can have a conscious conversation today about your experience so that your experience may help someone who's listening. So, with that being said, before we get into your near death experience, can you start by just painting a little picture of what your life was like prior to your near death experience?
It's a good question. My NDE, for those who didn't hear it, is in a unique position, in a sense that a lot of NDEers are adults, maybe teenagers or later in life where they have them, and so they have a full story to reference of before their NDE, after it, and and what happened during it. And so, as someone who specializes in trauma, as a therapist, I understand the value of a narrative or a story where there's a beginning, there's the event, and there's the after. And why I say trauma is what people don't recognize is there's a mental health component that many NDEs have, and certainly a traumatic component where, many people have memories of what they went through. And in my case, we'll get into it, but I certainly suffocated as a young child. So, and certainly that parlays itself into being a gift of recall, and that I have memory of it, but certainly, made things complex, certainly influenced the decision that I made in my own career path as a counselor. So to answer your question in the short, life before, I don't have much recollection of, consciously. Um, in my book, and I do remember, like before my NDE, I had a familiar understanding that something profound was going to happen. I didn't know what, and I even had a dream that I remembered before my NDE. And during my NDE, it just felt like deja vu, like I just saw this moment, knew it, and it was happening, and that was very scary, to have this premonition, everything unfolding. Uh, I guess it's a unique position though, because there's not much written down that I had it before my NDE, and I guess the rest of my life was filling the missing pieces and understanding the experience of every day of my life.
So let me ask you this. So you were a young child when you had your NDE. Did you recall your NDE immediately, or did it take time to recall your NDE?
Without question, I remembered it, and there hasn't been a day that has gone by that really I've forgotten it. Some days I think about it more than others, but it's always been there throughout the course of my life, in the back of my mind. My father, who's a therapist, also a therapist. I come from three different social workers within the family, three different generations rather. And he said shortly after I had my NDE, I came up to him and I said, Dad, remember when I was rushed by the ambulance to the hospital? Something, I'm just using my language here, but something profound happened. It's not going to make sense to you, but one day you'll understand. And so what I'm trying to say is, I think we all at some level, no matter what age we are, we have a knowing or an understanding. And sometimes there's an incongruency with our integration of that awareness in this life or in our ability to articulate those experiences or to make those things conscious. But each and every person has a memory deep down inside of them that just knows that they are more than just this story in this body. And yeah, and so my teacher Suzanne Giesemann says the word BS, which stands for belief system. So there's a lot of BS that people have to overcome to really find their truths and stuff like that. But eventually, everyone comes to a degree of understanding that they are so much more than what they perceive themselves as. And my NDE was that great reference that I have and so many others who have heard it. I hope, to dwell upon.
Well, okay, so now I'm curious. How old were you when you had your near-death experience? And if you're ready to talk about what happened, I'd love to hear that.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I was just the young age of 3 years old chronologically. When I had my NDE, I had something called pertussis, otherwise known as whooping cough. I went to a playground with family friends. I climbed up onto a ladder, going onto a slide. I completely suffocated due to this cough that I had, and I was choking on this whooping cough that I had. And so when you don't have any oxygen, you can't, unless you're on a ventilator, you can't really live or breathe for that matter. So I was completely suffocated, and it was the scariest, most traumatizing moment of my life to this date. All parts of my body just shut down, and there was nothing really kicking or working. And so rather than, the analogy that I often have is being in a car and the engine's not working, or even in a Tesla, if it's not working, whatever, if there's no engine, whatever, you get out of the car and you're just like, what's going on? Or you just kind of check things out. And so that's kind of what I did, where I just was curious as to what's going on in my body, what's happening. And I had awareness of it. And, moments later, I just felt my brain, literally snap in half due to the deprivation of oxygen. And once my brain cracked open, that's when the spirit realm and, as the saying goes, God came in, and I just left my body. I ascended, very quickly, onto the higher realms. And it was a beautiful moment, certainly in time, that unfolded and unpacked a lot of things that have always been inside of each person that we forget. I mean, such things that I saw were, my own spirit guides. I was aware of the creative source of all of life itself, which we often have a religious term for that as being God. But for me, all these things are just beyond words and, language. But for viewers' sake and, just this life, I do my best to articulate it. But I find that it's almost futile to really describe the indescribable. Uh, but the best way I could describe, the NDE that I had was, imagine your greatest experience that you've had in your life, whether that be the greatest meal, the greatest intimacy, the greatest sporting game, the greatest day, whatever that is. Now imagine that by like a billion times a billion, where there's no end of that climax, there's no end of that euphoria. And that was kind of what I felt like to a degree in my NDE, where in our lives, we're used to having a great experience, but there's almost like, it seems like there's just like a stop or like an apex of that point. When I was on the other side, there was no limitation with how high I felt, with how good I felt, with how euphoric you felt, nor were there any of these constructs that we have, or these confinements of time or linearity or anything like that. There was no past, present, future. All I knew is that everything was just totally fine, and I just felt like I was in this womb of love and God and everything. But the experience included seeing angels, spirit guides, loved ones on the other side, remembering past lives. I had, a life review of, my life as well as other lifetimes. And I had a lot of premonitions of things that I would do in this lifetime. So, I think people have different kind of NDEs. Some NDEs are not always euphoric or mystical. Some may be distressing. I would say my NDE was pretty classical on the mystical, euphoric side, and something that I'll never certainly forget. But I'm sure there's a lot to unpack. So I don't know if you have any thoughts or questions or parallels, but I love to hear people hear these things and just some of the parallels of the experience because it just shows you no matter where you're from, no matter what age you are, clearly as a young child that I had mine, there's something similar that we're all connected to, beyond some of the differences.
Yeah. Well, first, I just want to say that I know you said it's very difficult to put some of these things into words, but the way you described like your best experience, I immediately had a vision of riding a roller coaster because I love roller coaster.
Right. I
And
did
when you
likewise.
said times that by a billion, I just, had this, I can't actually extend and
Mm.
feel what that would feel like, but I got the magnitude. I think it would be the best word of what that felt like. And I've interviewed a lot of near death experiencers, and what is the common theme is that the love that they feel when
Mm.
they're having their experience is in fact indescribable. So I loved the visual that you offered us because it was able to give me a sense of like there is no limitless over there. There aren't constraints, I think is the word you said. And wow, what would that be like to feel the feeling of riding a roller coaster times a billion? Like I can't even imagine that. But I'm curious because you're seeing angels, you're seeing
Mm.
spirit guides, you're having premonitions of what you're going to do in this life. And at the time, you're only 3 years old. So, as a 3 year old here in this world, I would imagine that that would be very hard to kind of comprehend with our human minds. Was it difficult for you to understand it, or did you understand it perfectly when you were having your experience?
I mean, for me, from my standpoint, I have a hard time understanding that adults who have had NDEs could understand that. Why I say that is they have a lot more um, BS, than just a child. A lot more belief systems, that get in the way. Um, but as we know, no matter what culture you're from, no matter where you're from, religion, prior background, we connect to the same endless apex in the mountain, and we're connected to that point, eternally. I will say this that you are not what you think. Oftentimes we walk around in our bodies, we have an assigned name, an assigned gender. People will box us in. They'll tell us you're this, you're not that. And so all that is just a part of what is referred to as the ego, or some people call edging God out, but it's just a part of our story that we have in this lifetime. And so all these things are just our experiences of our soul, but it's not the full totality of who we are. And we hear all the time, I'm an infinite, eternal soul having a temporary human experience. Okay, well, what does that mean? That means, hey, I'm 3 years old. I'm just experiencing that, or any kid or anyone at any age is experiencing that. But beyond that is an eternal soul that is timeless, that is ageless. So it's not bound by a particular moment, that they're experiencing in this lifetime. We all are eternal souls. So there's no, if you're 3 years old, you're not like an infant soul on the other side. Although you can depict yourself like that, I think we're all kind of method actors in this lifetime and we just take on different roles in different ages. But beyond that, we are all just sparks of divinity, sparks of infinity of divinity. And so I was experiencing this, to answer your question, as a soul, not as a 3-year-old. While at the same time, there was still a part of me that was connected to my 3-year-old self. I think two things could be true, as I always say, at the same time. I mean, I was just very curious, like, what would I look like? What would my life be like? Like, all those things. I just was like, if I live out this kind of character, what's the next scenes? What would that character look like? And so that was something that was curious, and I was given a lot of answers, like I said, with some of the premonitions that I saw.
And what was that like for you, having these premonitions? What was that like for you after you came back? And I do have another question after that, but that's my burning curiosity right now.
Well, I think the premonitions were, like on a gas tank you have full and empty and somewhere in between. Like I was very much in between as to what I would do. I wasn't sure if I would stay there or go back on the tipping scale. Um, there's ambivalence. Some NDEers, most NDEers usually I find are told, hey, it's not your time. You have more work to do, or there's someone in your life that you're connected to that you have to kind of, finish out your work with or to live with. There's a contractual phase to this life too. But for my sake, there was full autonomy as to what I would do, and that was very difficult. But I was just shown like what I would be doing in this lifetime and what this lifetime was about, and that led me to understand, the sense of purpose. So we all come here for some degree of a drive, and doesn't mean that everyone has to be Tony Robbins or has to be, whatever, any of these like big, teachers or gurus, but we all come here to hopefully understand that we could have our own microcosm as a macrocosm. And the better our light is, the more it could shine, in the darkness around us. And so for me, that tipped the scale of seeing what I would do and the ability to integrate what I saw into this. It wasn't something that I really thought of much, though, in my life afterwards. It's something that I just kind of had on the surface. It wasn't until probably 2 years later where I was at a yoga seminar where a woman came up to me. Before that, like a couple of days before that, I was just at an abyss, and that's usually when things, you could be like the phoenix out of the ashes when that happens. But literally, I got into a fight with my dad. I was asked to leave my house. I walked around the corner of my house, and then I just found myself in a playground again. And I just started weeping and crying. And I just remembered, wow, the playground. Here I was, a kid kicked out of his house, didn't have a home at the time. I just remembered how the playground was symbolic of what I experienced in my NDE. And then later on, where we all are just children's in the eternal playground of God. And that is our ultimate home, no matter how displaced you feel or dejected from life. And then after seeing that, synchronicities in my NDE just started opening up. And this woman just came up to me. She looked like some micro chick. I don't know what her deal was, but I didn't like know, but she just started reading me. I just sitting on the floor and she just started giving these evidential pieces of information that no one knew. And she's like, wow, you're going to be a healer. And I see you speaking in front of crowds of people one day. You're going to make a big difference. And I'm like, I don't know. You're talking to the wrong guy. But then also another part of her was like, damn, I know what she's talking about. I have seen this. So angels come in many forms. And that woman was certainly an angel in my lifetime and just allowed me to remember who I was and why I was here.
That's really cool. And you kind of actually led into a little bit of what I was curious about. So I know a lot of near death experiencers have been given options. A lot have been told, like, no, it's not your time. You need to go back. Some have been given options. What was that part of your experience like? Were you given an option or were you told that it wasn't your time yet?
Yeah, no, it's fully autonomous. I wasn't told, hey, so why that is, I don't know. I just kind of was. Um, but yeah, it was a very difficult decision. I mean, to turn down the other side in the realm that I was in was very difficult. But I think what kept me going was just the God actualization, which is to be of service and to really not to wait till we go to heaven or to be heaven on earth, but to remember that each person is a piece of heaven on earth, as I always say. And I guess my job was just to remember, to help people to remember who they are, where they come from, where they're eternally connected to from my own experience. And I know in life, most people with purposes, they come from usually something transformative, or it might be something difficult or shake up period of the soul. Certainly in NDE was one of those moments where it influenced my sense of purpose and my calling in this life.
It's interesting that you say that. What just came in for me is I did not I overdosed, but I did not die. So I didn't have a near death experience. It was a couple of days later that I had a very spiritual, transformative experience, or whatever you call it, an STE. And I know through my recovery journey, the reason or the thing that changes our direction and we decide to get sober or we decide to recover is because we're so close to death. And in that bottom that we hit, we make a decision and we choose to live. And so I love how you said that because it seems like when I've interviewed other near death experiencers, what I notice is a pattern or a theme. And this is with people that I have been in recovery with, or also people who I've interviewed who've had near death experiences, is that we either come close to or we do die in order to choose to live. I'm curious
Mm.
your perspective on that.
I mean, it's certainly possible. I think sometimes to find yourself, you have to be willing to lose a part of yourself. And that's not a bad thing. And sometimes there's loss, there's gain. For instance, if I had trees planted and those trees live forever, there would be no room for another tree to come down. So one tree has to fall down for another tree to come up. And that's the cycle of life where, you know, we we need that to just kind of remain our own continuity here, in the cycle. And so ideas, concepts, belief systems are no different. I mean, for us to really grow to a greater understanding, we need to leave our old shells of perceptual viewpoints behind. Otherwise, there's no room to pivot or to change. Uh, I mean, in my case, having my NDE just reminded me of just the illusion of death, but also the power of surrender, which I know is a big element of, a lot of clients that I've worked with in recovery orientation. For instance, I say surrender. Um, I lost my own human breath, what that kept me alive in this body, but then I just was able to awaken to the realization that there was only one breath, and that's the breath of eternity, which we're all created from. My tradition, I always reference that the word for spirit is ruach, which in the Hebrew tradition means the wind of God, the breath of God, and that is our centerpiece of creation we're all from. And so when I was able to surrender to this breath of eternity, let go of my temporary paralysis and suffocation, was when I had continuity. And I think that's one of the many points that I hope viewers, readers could get from my books or my talks, is just how powerful it is to surrender. It's not a sign of giving up, it's a sign of giving in to the power that we're forever connected to.
I love surrender. It is what I say that led me to recovery. It wasn't, people will constantly tell me, "Oh, you're so brave. Oh, you've done such great work. We're so proud of you." And yes, I have made choices that have brought me to continuous sobriety. But the real thing that has led me to sobriety or that's kept me sober is the ability to surrender to a power that's greater than me. And for a long time, I couldn't surrender to a god. I just had to surrender to any power greater than myself, which
Mm.
at first was just another person, and me was a power greater than me. So I surrendered to listening to what they would have to say. I'm curious if you could dive a little deeper into what surrender means to you and how that can really play a part in our own peace and happiness and
Mm.
fulfilling our purpose here.
Well, like I said, like Suzanne, was talking about where our own belief systems, our own BS is really, we're hammered a lot of cultural myths. Certainly as a man, living in the United States, it's like you have to do something to be something, and the more that you hold on to, the stronger you are. The mental health journey uh, is a lot different, and there's a lot of incongruency with that. In the mental health journey, actually, the more you let go, the better you feel, the stronger you are. And so I think for people, really, to me, when you feel your weakest is when you're holding the most. When you're feeling your own strength is when you're really letting go, feeling untethered and really in alignment, with your power. And so your power isn't just like Herculean and carrying all this stuff on, it's really kind of learning how to have boundaries, how to really reduce all those things and how to work through, what you're facing, not just kind of run from them. And so to me, real strength is like learning that less is more, less stuff that we're holding on to, less attachment, more connectivity. And so when we're able to just let go of our own suffering, our own pain, and working through a lot of those emotions is when we could get into that, greater state of joy and, vibrate at a higher rate. So for me, that's something that I've found is just, the less that I'm kind of holding on to or attached to, the higher I'm able to fly in this life. And so certainly that, but yeah, I mean, a lot of people would just think that they have to do it all on their own and that it's a weakness to give into something, or someone outside yourself has your answers, you don't. So there's a disempowerment that's often, a power cultural myth that we have that that adults have it or religious leaders have it, and we don't. We don't have that ability to connect. And so that's something that I've really been able to delve into is just how much we have inside of us and how much is around us. And my NDE was just that great reminder of all that's inside of us at all times that sometimes we just can't seem to remember in this life.
I want to jump back a little bit because I just remembered you saying how after your NDE, you told your dad that, you know, you had this experience and he may not understand it. So I'm curious how that went, like in your childhood. Did your family listen to you? Did they believe you? Were they conscious as well already? How did that experience go as far as being able to articulate your experiences with people around you?
Yeah, I mean, it was something very sacred to me that I just didn't even bother telling anyone, which is a lot more common of near-death experiences than you'd think. Like sometimes it's just so sacred that it's not it's not appropriate to go around telling people. It's not the right time. I mean, I know I've spoken to a lot of people like this. I mean, one of them is Lorna Byrne. If I've interviewed before, she shared the same thing where she just knew that she had this connection, this NDE, and she felt the angels around her. But it's just she was told like you're not supposed to go around telling everyone it's not the right time. And I'm glad I didn't. And I grew up in a different era. Had I had it now, I mean, maybe it's more accepting, but in the early 90s, people weren't so caught up into this. Things have changed drastically in the last couple of years. But I mean, I just remember being in preschool, having interdimensional communication, looking at different classmates to just kind of see if they were connecting to what I did. And I just got looks of blank stares and people were bewildered. And I just knew I was just different. And that was very difficult because what's the trajectory and the ultimate goal of each child is just to fit in. It's just to kind of abandon yourself to fit in. Each child is supposed to kind of just be this box and to fit into that box and, leave everything else behind. And there's such a degree of programming and it's happened so fast at an early age. And so, at least when I grew up, a little different now. But yeah, I mean, it wasn't until I read a book by an author named Betty Eadie, who wrote the best-selling book Embraced by the Light, was when I really recognized the actual term of this. Like I didn't even know the term of it. I didn't even know that anyone else had this. I thought I was the only one. And so that really gave me the language and the diagnosis that this was a thing. It's totally real. Other people have it, and it's okay, to come out of the NDE closet, to talk to other people about it.
Yeah, I imagine that that would be very difficult going through your childhood. I have three kids, and like you said, it's like our human nature to want to fit in. And when we've had such, crazy experiences. Like, how do we fit in, right? If we
Mm.
feel so different. You said you were 3 years old when you had your near death experience. And I know a lot of experiencers have no metaphysical awareness or maybe abilities, psychic abilities that they're aware of at the time. But then when they come back, they are mediums or they are psychic or empathic. And I'm curious if, since you were 3 and you just mentioned something about interdimensional beings or something to that effect, I'm curious if you think that your NDE contributed to your empathic abilities.
No question. I mean, looking back at it, I grew up in a house of, 4 kids, and I was the biggest outlier, hands down, of all the kids. We had the same food, the same home, and I was just, by far the most different. Certainly, there's black sheeps in every family, but I think looking back on it, the NDE just made me unique, which as a kid is the biggest nightmare. But looking back on it, that's the coolest thing you can do because that means you're adding to something rather just than just being a leaf in water or just existing. You're doing different than the norm. But I had a lot of different intuitive, psychic experiences as a kid that was more so a burden than anything else. Like I would see things, hear things, know things before they happened, and it was just like I just wanted to live, and I would see it, and I was just like, all right, I just saw this happening a couple of days ago, and it's already here. So it felt very intrusive and just kind of weird and stuff like that. But I didn't communicate or verbalize this to anyone. I just kind of kept it within. Um, wasn't until I just understood that, hey, what you're having, there's a term for it. That's intuition, that's psychic, that's this. And once I got older, from having just the ability to name it, I could tame it, so to speak. And I was able to embrace it from having others who have also had this and that degree of universality to it. But absolutely. And I really contribute it to stuff that's always inside of each and every one of us. It's just kind of like pushed up to the surface. But I think it's also a brain thing. When I had my NDE, I just saw my brain, suffocating, snapping in half, and there was a neurotrauma that I had. And from preschool on, I just had this sliver of light that which just went through my brain that I was connected to, and I just knew that the brain is just merely the filter between the two worlds, and it's just kind of like this NDE just cleared out this filter where I was able to just, really be clear between the both realms and connect very easily to the two.
That's really awesome. And I love how you articulated that because my personal journey, I could see things, I could hear things. I did go to my mother when I was very, very young, probably about 4 or 5. I told her that I heard God talking to me, and I grew up in a Catholic environment. And so she told me, no, don't listen to that. That's the devil and it's trying to tempt you. So I freaked out. And being so sensitive, plus other variables that were going on, that is when I started addictive behaviors, was at 5 years old, to numb it out.
Wow.
And what you said was that, being different as a kid, being
Mm,
unique is not so easy when you're a kid. But as we grow up, we realize, oh, I was different for a different reason, right? And we can embrace it. So I love how you articulated that because I do know that a lot of my audience, a lot of people out there have had similar experiences where they've just felt different, or the word that's coming in is like a misfit
mm,
or outcast. And the truth is, at least I believe, the truth with the capital T is that we're all one, and there are no outcasts.
mm.
And I loved how you said the filter. It was like the filter was removed so you could be simultaneously connected to this world and what I would call the real world.
Yeah, and again, it really just has that brain-mind dichotomy where it just NDEs really display that there's a mind and then there's a brain. The two are not the same, and your mind goes beyond this brain. And having a brain that was suffocated, there was still this awareness. But yeah, I mean, it's just amazing how boxed in and programmed we are, even in our own, especially in our own beliefs. And our own beliefs about God and spirituality are so pivotal in our worldviews and our behaviors. And so if God is a limited God or God is this, and so therefore too, how we view others will judge others. If God is a judging God, we'll judge God. If God is a masculine God, will value masculine over the feminine. If God, so there's such a correlation between the two, but there's also a big threat of individual thought and connectivity to religion, which is a group consciousness, controlled mechanism versus spirituality, where it's more like, we don't need you to do this. We have it on our own, so you can't control us. You don't need me. Like, I could do my own thing. And that's very intimidating, to a lot of religious belief systems. It doesn't seek you to add to it. It's just kind of doing what we're doing and continuing on that, not having something out of left field that you're adding to things, in the mix.
Yes, very, very well articulated. And I could dive into the topic of what you just said
Sure.
for,
That's a whole segment in
for a
itself.
whole nother episode. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm all about dissecting, deconstructing,
Oh, yeah.
really looking at, the origins of religion. And so maybe we'll just table that for another episode because I am curious. I know you have several books that you've written. What was the journey like to getting those books written? What motivated you to author those books?
To publish my books. Yeah. My first book came out, right in the heat of, I was writing it right in the heat of the pandemic, when everything came out. And there's like a parallel situation of my NDE and what was going on, where my NDE had complete suffocation and there was no life, and I was just in that incubational period. And then all of a sudden, you're hearing people around you having this, like what I had, this highly contagious upper respiratory condition, feeling out of connectivity to life, not being able to really breathe in life, and just feeling so disconnected from their source, and feeling paralyzed and just having like their breath taken from them. And so I just said that this book really speaks to the moment, and it's time that I really started to write. And there's a lot of people that helped me out and factors that came into play, but to me, it's just life is, there's a give and take. Or, for me, I would so heavily influenced by so many writers in my life, and that changed my life. And I said, just why not give back, that book that I was given. And, there's it's kind of like a seesaw of, situation in life. And so that the moment, to answer your question, motivated me, but the story was always in there. And my second book, The Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder, a lot of things, I was kind of working on it, and unfortunately, my best friend completed suicide, and so I stopped. I just didn't have it in me to continue. I was like three-quarters done, but I just stopped. And then a medium just kind of read for me, and she said, your friend is asking, why'd you stop writing? He wants you to kind of finish for him. And so grief was a big part of the ability to find the strength to continue on that book. And the book really does speak to a lot of people dealing with grief. Goes onto areas of mental health, suicide, and it's just kind of like a little bit of emergence of the afterlife in this life. And just the analogy of Jacob's ladder is my name Jacob, who was chased by his brother Esau, and he had a dream of angels going up and down the ladder. I had my NDE on the ladder on a slide, so there's the symbology of it. But you think of a ladder, it goes from the ground and it goes up, in the air. And so kind of like Jacob's ladder is just taking things from the heavens down to the earth. And that's what an NDE really personifies, is you stretch out rubber band, you go to heaven, you come back, and your job and task is to really give over information to people that you were meant to cross paths with.
Well, thank you for being so expressive and gifting those books to the world. I'm sure they're amazing. I just love talking to you. I know that we've been chatting for a while, so I do have a couple of questions that I ask
Sure.
all my guests. But before we go there, is there anything else that you want to say or add to the conversation that we have or have not already talked about?
It's so much, so much. But what I would say is for viewers, is to not get down yourself if you haven't had any types of mystical experiences. before just being here in this body, you're a mystical being, so you don't necessarily need these experiences to have that to validate to you. But I do believe you're coming here to this conversation and Christina's channel because there's something that I and many others are talking about that's familiar. The good news is you don't have to go through all that I went through to experience that. It's already there within inside of yourself, and there's a familiarity there. And my recommendation is to keep on touching upon that area, always like removing that amnesia and finding like different talks to really strike a chord of just remembering who you are. And that's a part of that awakening experience. I mean, as a kid, one of my favorite books was Washington Irving's Rip Van Winkle, where he would take one day he took a sleep and he was just under a tree and he grew like a gray beard and he woke up and everything around him was different and all the people, the town was changed and just woke up one day and everything was different. And so many people in their lives are kind of like that man who just goes to sleep for however long and they're just kind of living and their body's there, but they're not really there. They're not living while they're living. And so I think the key is it's okay to wake up, to something different, something else, and to look at life in a little bit of a different way. And when we do that, this whole world could seem like a different place once you have that awakening moment. So if that makes sense.
That makes complete sense. And I just want to say that I have not had a near death experience. I have had a few spiritual, quite a few, but prior to experiencing those, I did feel like there was something wrong with me, or maybe I wasn't as spiritual or as powerful because I hadn't had any of those experiences. But that's just not true. And I loved how you said that, if you're attracted to this channel, if you're attracted to this
Hmm.
conversation, it's like listen and take what resonates. Because if it resonates, then it's probably hitting something that you're
Yeah.
remembering. And if it
I mean,
doesn't,
and who know,
that's
yeah, and
okay.
who knew the kingdom of heaven in many ways better than Jesus? And he said, the kingdom of heaven to me is in you too. And so I think that's what people have to bear in mind that we all have a doorway to that place. We all have a memory of that place. We're all connected to that place. And the fact that we're tuning in here is a sign that you're remembering something and it's hitting a chord.
It reminds me of a quote that I'm not going to say verbatim, but it was something about what resonates with you is because it's a remembrance. It's not a learning of something new. It's a remembrance of something that you've already known or experienced. So thank you so much for that. I appreciate you articulating it in that way. And are you ready for the final three questions?
I am ready. Yeah.
All right. So the first question I have is how would you define God or source, creator, universe?
I would just say the centerpiece of reality, where all of creative life and all of life itself flows from, is forever connected to, and it's just the ultimate light which each spark of life itself comes from, is forever connected to.
I love that. The second question is what would you say is the purpose of life?
I like the Pablo Picasso quote. I'm probably botching it, but he said like the meaning of life is to find out. Um, the meaning of life is to find your gift, and the purpose of it is to give it away. And so I think each and every one of us has something unique to offer. And so many times we have judgment of what others do or what the Times calls as to being of value. And there's so much emphasis on self-abandonment or just running away from who you are, um, doing something to become something. And from day one, we're taught, hey, outgrow that child, move past that thing and just change and stuff like that. And I think for us, if we were to be more authentic and connected to who we are, I think authenticity and being real is a gift in itself and our greatest gift. So I think really it's just being your authentic self that's a gift in itself, but really finding out, okay, you think of it like a musical note, like I have my note on the piano, like what's the note that I have and how could I really evoke that note? and have that note, a note that only I could play, that no one else can play the way that I play it, and continually to refine that note, if that makes sense.
Thank you. The final question is, if you could take one piece of wisdom that you have now and offer it to any younger version of yourself, what
Hmm.
would that one piece of wisdom be?
Read my book. No. No, no, I'm messing. The Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder, I'm messing. I would say, you know, I study human behavior certainly as a therapist, and I look at the statistical data of what common is common with people who are at the end of life for people in Alzheimer's and what they regret. And the common regret that people have is usually trying to be someone else's version of who that person wanted you to be instead of being who you are. And so I would say to myself, like, stop, thinking about how the magnitude of what you're doing, noticing that it all pass. You don't regret what you do, you usually regret what you don't do. And so I think in my childhood, I was just kind of like that paralyzed kid where I just, you know, I didn't take shots. I just froze up. I just, was so fear driven as a kid and just worrying about things that were so insignificant and understand that all of life passes and it's just kind of like the clouds in the sky. They all just move and just kind of doing your will, doing what you want and not always worrying about what everyone will think of you or judgment. Just really doing your dance and not worrying about what other people will think of it instead of constantly editing yourself like a robot to please the cultural consciousness around you.
I recently, well, a while ago, I did an interview with a woman and we talked about the book. I can't remember the exact title, but it was The Five Wishes and the Five Regrets of Those Who Are Dying. And that was fascinating. And
Oh
it
yeah.
sounds just in alignment with what you just said. So I love that. How do people find you?
Well, they don't have to take a spaceship to me these days. I'm still here, but you can. But I to be found at jacobelcooper.com is my website. Emphasis on the com part of .com. I'm just messing. And they could find me on social media, Jacob Cooper LCSW, Facebook, Instagram. I am on TikTok as well, Jacob Cooper LCSW. Um, and I have an Amazon page, Jacob Cooper LCSW. You can find both of my published books, Life After Breath, The Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder there, as well as YouTube, The Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder, my podcast where I have my own segments and have some authors on and some different personalities on the channel and hope to evoke different line of awakenings in every area that I go to.
That there's a lot of places where people can find you. So I'll
Right.
make it easy and I'll put all the links to all your pages, your YouTube channel, your books, your website. I'll put those all in the
Yeah.
description for anyone that wants to find you. Jacob, this has been such a fun conversation. Thank you so much for being you, for sharing your experiences and continuing to do what you do to help raise the consciousness of our planet. So it's
Oh,
been an
thank you. This
honor.
was a
It's been a
joy. Yeah.
pleasure. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you. An honor.
I would like to personally thank you for tuning in to this episode. If you haven't already, please be sure to like this episode, subscribe to my channel, and turn on notifications so that you never miss a beat. And if you really resonated with this content, please share it with all of your friends so that collectively we can expand our consciousness. Have a very blessed week.